Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cristina Nogueira da Fonseca. I am a professor and a human experience consultant. Today, we're going to talk about something that comes up every day at work, in meetings, in feedback conversations, in difficult moments, but that we rarely stop to think about empathy. The title of the session is The Power of Being Human at Work. The main idea is straightforward. In a world that moves fast and relies more and more on technology, being human, it's not a weakness, it's one of our greatest strengths. Before we get into the content, let me show you what we'll be covering today. We will look at 5 connected areas: the beliefs we have about empathy, the behaviors we practice or those we avoid, the habits that build or damage culture, the impact empathy has on results, and the performance that comes from it. Also, we'll be talking about real situations, the kind that leaders deal with every day. And we start with a question I want you to keep in mind throughout this session. Daniel Goleman, the father of emotional intelligence, said something that still challenges me. People think that they are better at empathy than they actually are. Yeah, let me say that again. Everyone believes they are empathetic, but the real question is, are they really? The vast majority of leaders genuinely believe they already practice empathy, and this is one of the most silent problems in organizations today. Why? Because empathy is frequently confused with being nice, with avoiding conflict, with protecting feelings, and that creates a false sense of competence. We think we are being empathetic because we didn't say anything wrong, because we smiled in a meeting, because we let the person speak, but empathy is so much more than that. And to understand what empathy really is, let's first look at what it is not. Brene Brown defines it with brutal clarity. Empathy is not about agreeing, it's about understanding. And this is a key point. I can completely disagree with someone and at the same time genuinely understand where their perspective comes from, what drives them, and what they fear. And that leads us to one of the most common confusions. Being nice means protecting feelings, avoiding conflict, softening everything. It's comfortable, but it's frequently ineffective. But genuine empathy, it's different. It means being clear about expectations, even when it's hard, while still genuinely considering the person in front of you. I can give tough feedback, I can hold a boundary, and I can do it with empathy. Empathy doesn't ask me to pretend everything is fine. It asks me to acknowledge the other person's reality while still showing up as a leader. And when a leader confuses empathy with niceness, the consequences are serious. Simon Sinek puts his finger on exactly the right wound. The most common leadership gap is not competence, it's connection. And leaders often have the right tools. They know how to manage, how to plan, how to execute. But what's missing is the human connection that turns a functional team into a high performance one. And when that connection is absent, the risks are concrete and measurable. Two scenarios and two opposite risks, but both equally real. When genuine empathy is missing, trust drops, people disengage, and burnout risk rises. People stop sharing problems and they stop asking for help. They show up, but they don't commit. When there's too much niceness, feedback gets avoided, accountability disappears, and performance falls. The leader wants to please everyone but ends up helping no one grow. In both cases, something is lost. The difference lies in the balance, and developing that balance is exactly what we are here to work on today. But before we get into solutions, we need to understand the problem more clearly. Leaders tend to overestimate their own empathy, and that creates blind spots in conversations, in feedback, in the way they respond to what happens around them. I want you to think of a recent situation, a time when someone on your team went quiet or less present. What did you do? Did you ask what's going on, or did you assume it was a lack of motivation? Those moments are the real test of empathy, and that's exactly where most leaders fall short. Not out of bad intentions, but out of the lack of awareness. Because when empathy is genuine, the impact on the business is real and it's measurable. The Center for Creative Leadership, after decades of research, concluded that empathy is a key driver of effective leadership and organizational performance. It's not a nice to have, it's not a weekend coaching skill, it's a critical success factor. And the data shows exactly how to translate that into results. So, empathy, it's not a soft skill, it is a performance enabler. When relationships are strong, built on trust and mutual understanding, collaboration improves, execution accelerates, and decisions are made faster and with greater alignment. Strong relationships reduce noise, internal politics, and rework. And that has a direct impact on efficiency and results. But what happens when empathy is absent? Hemi Edmondson, known for groundbreaking work on psychological safety, says a lack of empathy at work is one of the strongest predictors of burnout. Think about that. Burnout doesn't only come from overwork. It comes from feeling invisible, from having no safety to be vulnerable, from knowing that mistakes will be punished rather than learned from. So, when empathy is missing, we see decreased employee engagement, a higher turnover and retention challenges, poor communication that leads to rework and inefficiency, and increase in stress and burnout. Each of these has a real cost: financial, human, and cultural. And most organizations are paying that cost without even knowing where it comes from. But the good news is that the reverse is equally true. Gallup confirms with their data employees who feel cared for are more engaged and more productive. Feeling cared for, feeling that you matter. That's not sentimental, it's strategic. And here is how we can translate that into a chain of impact. Empathy generates trust, and trust generates stronger team commitment. Empathy creates psychological safety, and psychological safety leads to better performance and innovation. Empathy improves retention, and lower turnover reduces the cost of reemplacement and knowledge loss. It's a chain. Each link reinforces the next, and it all starts with a leadership choice. But how do you actually practice empathy day to day? The answer lives in concrete situations. Kim Scott, author of The Radical Candor, says leadership is not about being liked, it's about being effective in difficult moments. Difficult moments are the real test. Anyone can be empathetic when everything is going well. The question is, what do we do when there's pressure, tension, and conflict? And that's exactly in those moments that empathy matters most. Empathy is not tested in easy moments. It reveals itself under pressure, in tension, in discomfort. Three everyday leadership moments where it matters most: when giving difficult feedback, when supporting a struggling team member, and when communicating through change. These are the situations where most leaders either pull back, avoiding the conversation altogether, or push forward too hard without considering the impact. Let's look at some scenarios. But first, one more truth from Gallup to keep in mind. People leave managers, not companies. Most resignations aren't about the role or the salary. They're about the relationship with a manager, about not feeling seen, heard, or valued. So, what separates a typical reaction from an empathetic shift? A team member starts missing deadlines, goes quiet in meetings, and seems disconnected. Typical reaction is to assume lack of motivation or commitment, maybe call them out or increase the pressure. The empathetic shift is to replace judgment with curiosity, is to ask before concluding. The powerful question here is: I have noticed a change. What's going on from your side? This question opens a space. It doesn't judge, it doesn't accuse, it invites. And it often reveals something the leader never suspected. The same principle applies when deadlines start slipping. So, deadlines are slipping. There's pressure from above, and the temptation is to push harder. The typical reaction is to assume poor time management or lack of ownership. The empathetic shift is to explore the limitation before escalating the pressure. Focus on clarity and support. The question here is, I have noticed that deadlines are slipping, what's getting in the way, and how can we address it together? This approach doesn't give up on expecting results, but it does so through partnership instead of punishment. And what about when there's an active resistance to change? A change is underway, and someone on the team is clearly hesitant, maybe even openly critical. The typical reaction is to label them as negative or resistant, is to push for alignment without creating space for discussion. The empathetic shift is to acknowledge the concerns, to create a genuine space for dialogue. The question here is, I have sensed some hesitation. What are your main concerns about this change? Rarely, resistance is personal. It's usually fear of losing control, of not being able to keep up, of things going wrong. When a leader names that, resistance often softens. And one of the most delicate scenarios when personal problems are affecting someone's work. Someone's performance shift, and there are signs that something in their personal life may be having an impact. The typical reaction is to ignore the situation and focus only on performance, to assume lack of commitment or professionalism, to avoid the conversation altogether out of discomfort. The empathetic shift is to acknowledge that external factors exist. It's to create space for the person to share and to balance support with clarity on expectations. The question here is, I've seen a shift lately. Is there anything affecting your work that we should take into account? This question doesn't intrude, it offers an opening, and it leaves the decision to share entirely in the person's hand. These four scenarios have something in common. Everything starts with micro behaviors. McKinsey summarized it well. What leaders do in small moments defines the culture. Not the grand value statement, not the team building workshops, the small daily choices. What I ask, how I respond, how much time I give. And those small choices have a name. Micro behaviors, little things done consistently create meaningful impact. Empathy, it's not an abstract mindset. It's a set of recurrent behaviors, and those behaviors are what shape trust, clarity, and team effectiveness. The good news is that you don't need more time, you need different attention. And that leads us to one of the biggest mindset shifts of the session. Most leaders say, I need more time to be empathetic. The reality is that they do not need more time. They need to adjust how they respond in the moment. Empathy isn't an extra 1 hour meeting for a week. It is what you do in the first 30 seconds of a difficult conversation. It is the pause before reacting. It's the question you ask instead of the conclusion you jump to. And here are the concrete behaviors that make that difference. 7 micro behaviors that any leader can start using today. First, pause before reacting. 1 second of silence can completely change the tone of a conversation. Second, ask one more question. Before giving the answer, ask one more time. Third, validate before responding. I understand what you mean, even if you disagree with what comes next. Fourth, listen without interrupting. Let the person finish their thought. Fifth, clarify before assuming. What did you mean by, instead of filling in the blanks yourself? Sixth, acknowledge before challenging. I see where you're coming from. Opens the door to the dialogue. Seventh, focus on understanding, not just replying. Most people listen to respond. The best leaders listen to understand. None of those require more time. They require intention, and intention is a choice. I'll close with one final quote from Simon Sinek, which I think says it all. Leadership, it's not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. Being a leader isn't about having the right answers, hitting the best numbers, or making the fastest decisions. It's about creating the conditions for the people around you to bring their best. And that is a daily choice, made in small moments, with empathy. I want to leave you with one challenge. This week, identify one moment where your first instinct is to judge or to conclude, and replace it with curiosity. Ask a question instead of drawing a conclusion. That's the first step. Small, but powerful. Thank you very much for listening.